An abandoned village, a haunting presence, and a journey that blurs the line between escape and entrapment. Will you dare to follow? Lost Traveler, submitted by Hoang Minh. I was born and raised in Vietnam, and ever since I was a child, I've always been sensitive to the unseen, things that others couldn't see or feel. My grandmother used to say I had a gift, but it wasn't the kind of gift anyone would want. I'd always sense things, shadows out of the corner of my eye, strange cold drafts in warm rooms, the feeling that someone was watching me when I was alone. It wasn't constant, but it was frequent enough that I learned to live with it. After finishing university, I decided to take a few months off before starting my career. It wasn't an unusual thing to do. Plenty of my friends were doing the same, backpacking through Southeast Asia, exploring foreign lands. But I wanted to see more of my own country, places I'd only heard about but never visited. Vietnam was vast, filled with mountains, rivers, forests, and villages untouched by modern life. I was excited to discover it all, but I was also wary. I knew that some of these remote places were home to more than just legends. For the first few weeks of my journey, everything was perfect. I started in the north, trekking through the misty mountains of Sapa, visiting temples and old war sites, soaking in the history and beauty of the land. Sometimes I felt that familiar tingle on the back of my neck, the sense that something or someone was near, watching me from the shadows. But nothing ever happened, and I chalked it up to my overactive imagination. But then I reached the village. It wasn't on any of the maps I had. I was making my way through a remote area in the Central Highlands when I stumbled upon it. The path I had been following was overgrown and barely visible, winding through dense forest and rocky terrain. I had planned to reach another village by nightfall, but the sun was already setting, and I was nowhere near where I was supposed to be. As I walked, I caught a glimpse of something through the trees, a cluster of rooftops, barely visible in the fading light. Relief washed over me. I wasn't sure where I was, but at least I had found a place to rest for the night. The village seemed old, ancient even. The houses were small, wooden structures with thatched roofs, and the entire place felt untouched, as if time had passed it by. There were no cars, no motorbikes, not even electricity. It was eerily quiet. I could hear the wind rustling through the trees and the faint trickle of a stream nearby, but other than that, there was no sound. I approached cautiously, calling out in case anyone was nearby. "Xin Chao, hello?" No one answered. As I entered the village, I felt it again, that familiar tingle at the back of my neck, the sensation that I was being watched. The hair on my arms stood up, but I pushed the feeling aside. I was tired, and the light was fading fast. I needed to find shelter for the night. I wandered through the village, peering into the darkened houses. They were empty. No signs of life, no furniture, no belongings. It was as if the people who had lived here had vanished, leaving everything behind. I felt a knot forming in my stomach, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe the villagers had moved on. Maybe they had abandoned the place for some reason. But then, why did everything feel so wrong? The air was thick, almost suffocating. There was a heaviness to the atmosphere that made it hard to breathe. My chest felt tight, and every instinct in me screamed to leave, to get out of this place as fast as I could. But where would I go? The sun had almost disappeared, and the forest around the village was dense and unwelcoming. I had no choice but to stay. I found a small house near the edge of the village and decided to spend the night there. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a single room with a dusty wooden floor and bare walls. There was no bed, just a few scattered mats that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. I set down my backpack and unrolled my sleeping bag, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that gnawed at my insides. As I lay down, I told myself that everything would be fine. I had spent nights in stranger places during my travels, and nothing bad had ever happened. But something about this village felt different. It felt alive, like the very air was watching me, waiting for something. Sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned for hours, my mind racing with thoughts of the empty houses and the strange silence that hung over the village like a thick fog. And then, in the middle of the night, I heard it. A voice. It was faint at first, barely audible over the sound of the wind. But as I strained to listen, it grew louder, more insistent. It was speaking in Vietnamese, though the words were slurred and distorted, like they were coming from far away. D, leave. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked around the darkened room, but there was no one there. The voice was coming from outside, just beyond the door. I held my breath, listening. D, you don't belong here. The voice was clearer now, closer. My hands trembled as I reached for my flashlight. I didn't want to open the door, but I had to know. I had to see if someone, or something, was out there. I crept to the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. Slowly, I pulled the door open, shining the flashlight into the darkness. There was nothing there, just the empty village, bathed in the faint glow of the moon. But then I saw them, footprints, fresh and wet, leading away from the house and into the center of the village. I wasn't alone. The next morning, I awoke with a start, the memory of the night before still fresh in my mind. The village, the well, the woman. They haunted my thoughts, lingering like a fog I couldn't shake. But there was something else, something even more unsettling. My backpack was missing. I had left it beside me when I collapsed on the forest floor, too exhausted and terrified to care about anything but escaping the village. But now it was gone, as if it had vanished in the night. I searched the area frantically, my heart racing as I realized that all of my belongings, my food, my water, my map had disappeared. But that wasn't the worst part. As I stood there trying to make sense of it all, I noticed something strange in the dirt beside me. Footprints. But they weren't mine. They were small, like a child's, and they circled around me as if someone had been watching me while I slept. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The birds that had been chirping the day before were silent now, and the wind had died down, leaving the air heavy and still. I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. I began to walk, my footsteps slow and hesitant as I made my way down the narrow path that cut through the trees. The further I walked, the more I felt like I was being followed, though every time I turned around, there was nothing but the empty forest behind me. But then, just when I thought I had escaped, I saw it. At the edge of the trees, barely visible through the thick underbrush, was the village. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. How could it be here? I had left it behind, ran as far as I could, but there it was, exactly where I had found it the night before. The well stood in the center, the wooden houses lining the dirt paths, and there, standing by the well, was the woman in the owl dye. She didn't move, she just stood there, watching me. My legs felt weak, and I wanted to turn and run, but something kept me rooted to the spot, as if an invisible force was holding me in place. The air around me grew colder, and I could feel the weight of her gaze pressing down on me, suffocating me. And then she spoke. "You shouldn't have come this way," she said, her tone devoid of emotion, almost as if she were stating a fact. "This place is not meant to be seen." Her eyes, dark, hollow, met mine, and a chill washed over me. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a plea. It was a warning. The air around us felt thick, heavy with something unspoken. "I thought I heard footsteps," she whispered, almost to herself, her voice soft but unsettling. "But it was you. It was always you." I took a shaky step back, but her eyes followed my every move, like she knew exactly where I was going, even before I did. There was something she wasn't telling me, something I didn't want to know. "There are places you can go," she murmured, "but not this one, not here." She slowly lifted her hand, pointing toward the trees behind me. Her movements were deliberate, mechanical. "Turn back before it's too late." I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the silent forest, but this time the village followed me. I could feel it, the presence of the houses, the well, the woman. Every corner I turned, every path I took led me back to the same spot. I was trapped. Hours passed, maybe days. Time had lost all meaning. I wandered aimlessly, trying to find a way out, but every road led me back to the village. My legs ached, my throat was dry, and my head pounded with exhaustion. I was losing hope. And then, as the sun began to set, I heard something behind me. It wasn't the woman. It wasn't the voices. It was a hand, cold and firm, gripping my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see her again, but there was nothing. only the empty forest and the faint outline of the village, still waiting for me, as if it would always be there. I ran, faster this time, until my legs gave out and I collapsed in the middle of the path. When I woke up, I was back in the forest, the village nowhere to be seen. The sun was rising, casting long shadows through the trees, and the air was warm again. My backpack was beside me, as if it had never been lost. But I knew better. I gathered my things and left, never looking back. But even now, years later, I can still feel the weight of the village, the pull of the well, the cold hand that gripped my shoulder. It's always there, just out of sight, waiting for me to return. And sometimes when the wind is just right, I can hear the faint rustle of footsteps following me wherever I go.